Welcome to First Strike here on VSiN. I'm your host, Dave Ross. For the next hour, we're going to break down a very compelling main event coming up this Saturday between Kai Kara-France and, of course, Amir Albazi. Right now, we're seeing about minus $1.10 each way in this fight. So we're going to get all caught up with Nick Kalikas, Finocchiaro, Dan Vreeland, and Reed Kuhn to talk about this main event and the card. A pretty deep card here with a lot of veterans that you certainly will know. Before we get to that, very quickly, did hear during the bye week, if you will, for the UFC, we all had a week off. We heard some news that maybe Dana White is in collaboration with Adam Sandler to do a UFC comedy. And while I think this could be something I would certainly be interested in and will view, I just asked, when was the last good comedy that Adam Sandler was in? So again, the optimist in me says, I hope it's really good. The pessimist says, I'm not going to have high hopes. So we'll see if there's actually a UFC movie to be made. Maybe Nick Kalikas will be setting the odds whether or not that movie will be good. Let's bring in Nick right now. Of course, veteran UFC odds maker and founder of MMA Odds Breaker. You can follow him on Twitter at Fight Odds. Nick, great to have you back in the program, my friend. You would not set a number on a hypothetical comedy as to the over-under, how many minutes or hours before I walk out of it.
You know what? I've been asked to do so many crazy things in the past that this would not be out of the ballpark at all.
Yeah, sometimes they put odds up on TV shows, so you never know. We'll see if this movie actually comes to fruition. When I look at the main event here, obviously in the flyweight division, we know Kai Kara-France, and he always feels like a guy that's been right there on the cusp. A couple losses to Brandon Moreno in his career, of course, maybe the best flyweight champion. Albazi feels like a guy right now that, even though they're about the same age, we know, again, he'd like to get the fight down to the ground. We'd assume Kai Kara-France would like to keep this standing and use his punching power. What do you make of this main event, and have you seen any of the numbers change here in the last couple weeks?
Yeah, this is a good spot for a pick'em type of bout because, I mean, you have obviously a guy like Kara-France, in my opinion. His rise has been phenomenal. You watch his improvement the last few years. He's a legit title contender, and it's all the work he's put in. It's surrounding himself by greats such as Volkanovski, such as Izzy. Like, he's absorbing all the greatness from those guys, and he stepped up his game to another level. So I respect him a ton. I think he's a worthy title contender type of situation for him. Now, of course, Albazi is the next big thing. A lot of people, there's a lot of hype behind him. It's a good spot for him to come in here and steal all the shine and get himself in that title contention spot as well. So you said it correctly. Albazi, his path to victory is on the ground. Kara-France's path to victory is stuffing the takedowns and keeping this upright. Now, at the window, we've seen both sides of this get bet. That's why pick'em is about right now in most places, because we see the public side of it seems to be a little bit more towards Albazi. Kara-France isn't getting the respect he deserves, I think, in my opinion. I think he's a great fighter, and he could be the slight favorite, and we might see him close the slight favorite.
Nick, that's fascinating because, again, in a main event here, potentially 5-round, it could go the distance, and normally with lighter fighters here, certainly at 125 pounds, it normally has, you would think, that the capacity to go longer into the championship rounds. But because both of these guys have a lot of finishing potential, what are you seeing here? Because right now at 3.5, which is an interesting number to be set at, not 4.5 or 2.5, but at 3.5, it is juiced heavily to the over minus $1.60.
Yeah, you know, Kara-France, again, he's not your typical flyweight fighter when it comes to power on the feet. He's got that fight-ending shot that just you can't deal with in a flyweight division. So he's got that ability. And, of course, defensively, he is a little bit flawed at times. And we've seen him get beat on the ground. And that liver shot that he ate last time, I mean, you can't even fault him for that one, for crying out loud. So the finish is basically there for both sides of it. That's why you're seeing the 3.5. So it's a tricky one here. I think we're going to see some two-way action here as well.
Do you think you'll see a lot of prop action, Nick, here in the coming days? Obviously, if you like Kai Kara-France, yes, you could play a KO, TKO, or DQ at plus 350. And again, if we find those pathways to victory, Albazi feels like it would be the sub would be in play. Do you think you'll see a lot of two-way action on both those methods of victory, if you will?
I don't think the props will be as popular as we normally see because this is such a competitive back and forth fight. I think we'll see more action actually on the fight itself than the props. I mean, like you said, maybe a path to victory on the ground for Albazi, maybe the knockout prop. We will definitely see those props get bet market wide, but I still think the majority of the action is going to come in on just the side either way.
What do you make of the co-main here when you have Bruce Leroy back in there, Alex Caceres against Daniel Pineda here? So, again, you get some veterans, and I feel like Caceres is one of those guys that the betting market wants to back because of his popularity, and we've all kind of grown up with Alex inside the octagon here, 34 years old. He's actually 3 years the junior of Pineda in this one, and a big favorite here for Caceres at minus $1.75. Any movement on this here do you expect in the coming days?
Yeah, a little bit sharper action coming on the Caceres side. Pineda's a very dangerous opponent, man, because he's game in all areas and all aspects of it. So it's hard to lay chalk against him because he can go out there and spark you on the feet. He's got good wrestling. He's got good submission skills offensively as well. It's just his inconsistency, I think, bothers a lot of people. And Caceres has been fighting off on another level. I mean, his rise again since the Ultimate Fighter to where he's at right now has been phenomenal. So I like what I see at Caceres. I think he's a little bit more stable, a little bit more dependable here, and the sharp action is hitting his side market wide. But again, as it creeps closer to 200, the danger and the ability Pineda has on the other side makes it a little bit tough.
Yeah, and again, that one potentially 3 rounds here in the co-main event. And again, you don't think of Caceres as a guy that's going to get you out of there right away, so you can understand why here. At a round and a half, though, it is juiced to 2-1 here, minus $2. You got to pay and lay if you want to go with the over here. That is interesting to me that it's not set at 2.5 here. Would you look at alternate markets if you could, if you do like the over for the fight to go the distance? By the way, you can get almost 2-1 here plus $1.95 without picking a winner.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, I don't think it's a smart bet to actually go the distance here because there's just so much firepower offensively on both sides of this, right? So I think it will probably finish before it hits the scorecards. That's why it's intriguing. The 1.5 is set about right now. And if you're going to make people lay that juice, that's the way to go too. If they're going to have to go over 1.5, if they think 7.5 minutes is easy for these two fighters to kind of withstand, then make them lay the chalk. But I don't know, man. I think it's going to probably end around that point. So I favor this fight not to go the distance.
All right, so plus money here if you think it's going to get done inside of 7.5 minutes. Speaking of veterans, I see a bad moon rising. Jim Miller's back on this card here against Jared Gordon. Again, 2 veterans now in the octagon. This is why this fight card, after a week off, you look at it, it's just littered with guys that are getting up there, right? A little bit in age here. Jim Miller pushing 40 here. We know Gordon's almost 35, so not exactly spring chickens in there. And Miller, he's been very profitable throughout his UFC career as a dog. He's a dog again, plus $1.60. What are you seeing here, Nick?
Yeah, more sharp action coming in market wide on Jim Miller. You know, you'd be surprised because Gordon, again, coming off the Pimblet, I understand he's had a fight since then, but still the hype and a lot of people believing that he beat Patty in that spot, you would think that they would carry him enough in this fight over an aging veteran like Jim Miller. But the sharp action is coming in on Miller. I think he does match up pretty well. Now, the takedown's going to be very difficult for Jim Miller to get here, but on the feet, it's going to be relatively close. We've seen Gordon, he's hittable, but he does have that power you got to watch out for as well. So this is a very competitive fight. I like it. You know, it's a head scratcher. It's hard to lay the chalk here, so I understand why the people are coming in on the underdog and Jim Miller. He still has enough left in the tank to get this done.
And a lot of finishing potential, obviously, for a guy like Jim Miller if he can get this fight down to the ground. That'll be a very interesting one. Let's go back to the flyweights here. Feels like the lighter weights certainly are taking center stage here. Victor Altamirano is going to take on Tim Elliott. Tim Elliott's had pretty well-documented stuff going on outside of the octagon. We've seen that with recent fighters, though. Sometimes they can block out all the noise, get inside to where they do business inside the octagon and thrive. So again, 2 guys north of 30, Tim Elliott now at 36, but he is laying $1.75 here. What are you seeing so far in this one, Nick?
This is a spot where Tim Elliott did get bet up initially, and now it's coming back down a little bit. So there's 2-way sharp action hitting the market here, too. The original sharp action that came in on Elliott, I think it's the right side. He's probably getting a little bit too much disrespect because of the stuff that you mentioned, because of the personal situation, his personal life. I mean, you hate to see that kind of stuff go on for anybody, but from what we're gathering on social media and what we're seeing, I mean, he's playing the part right. He looks in phenomenal shape. I think, if anything, it's kind of going to be a chip on his shoulder and motivation. So I think this line would be over 200, minus 200 or more if the circumstances surrounding him right now didn't come into play. So I think that's what's causing the line to drop a little bit. You're going to hear the narrative of, you know what, Tim Elliott has a lot going on. The dog is live in this spot. But I think when it's all said and done, it's not going to be the case. I think Tim Elliott's going to shine here. And if you're getting minus 165-ish, I think it's a spot to probably lay the chalk.
Yeah, we saw that with Mackenzie Dern, right? The last time out here about 2 weeks ago, by the time we get to fight night on Saturday, with all the things going on in her life, she said it actually fueled her fire inside the octagon. That could be true of Tim Elliott. So keep an eye there for Narrative Street here as we get closer and closer to the fights. Again, you go down the card, you've got guys like Jamie Malarkey on the card, but you also have the pitbull back there. Andrei Arlovsky's been fighting since the 90s, and here he's back in there against Dontel Mays. What are you seeing? Any sharp money coming in, or is this going to be public money on Arlovsky because he's so well-liked and respected through the decades?
Death, taxes, and Arlovsky by split decision, man. You're getting probably another one of those fights right there. It's just so difficult to bet his fight because even when I think he loses a fight, the judges give it to him.
Right.
When I think he wins a fight, sometimes it goes the other way. So very difficult. I mean, he is by far the better fighter here. Make no mistake about it, right? I mean, you cannot compare the two. I mean, even looking at their resumes, but I mean, he is getting a little bit older. I mean, his chin has been spotty to say the least if you look at his resume overall, but he's still been a warrior and he still belongs on the roster. So for me, I think you got to go with Arlovsky or pass. It's hard to lay chalk in this spot. So whichever side that you're seeing some plus money on is probably the way to go. And I think you can make a case for Arlovsky being a slight favorite. Like I said, though, it's tough. Father time catches up with everybody, and the durability factor, you got to be a little bit concerned.
44 years young. Andrei Arlovsky, the former heavyweight champion of the world, back in it debuted. What was that, Britain? 1999, Britton Hess is telling me in my ear that he debuted 1999, and we're still talking about Andrei Arlovsky in 2023. Pretty incredible. Hey, I only have about 30 seconds to go. Very quickly, Nick, I know that now we're starting to see points being associated with odds in MMA. How are you working around that, through that? How is that process working out?
You talk about the point spreads and some of those options that we're getting. It's awesome. I think the more they've been offshore for a while, you've been able to bet those kind of propositions for a while now offshore. So now we're starting to see some of the stateside books pick it up, which I think is a great idea. The more options that you give players, the better it is. So right. Books like DraftKings are stepping it up, giving you all the same game parlays. And again, and some of these spread bets now as well. So I think just the more options you have, you could definitely pick those apart as well.
All right, we're going to have a longer conversation on that in a first strike to come. But again, check out Nick Kalikas. UFC on the line as well, and a great job hosting the Gambler's Perspective. Always appreciate it, Nick. We'll catch up again very soon. Coming back with Lou Finocchiaro here on First Strike. DraftKings Sportsbook is giving you plenty of ways to bet the UFC. Just download the DraftKings Sportsbook app, and you're able to bet on more than just the main event. DraftKings has great odds on fight lines, total rounds, and futures for all MMA events. Eligibility restrictions do apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for all the terms and conditions. Back here rolling on this edition of First Strike. Whenever I don't get to see and speak to Lou Finocchiaro, my mom and dad are always like, hey, I'm like, Ma, we had a week off. We're all back. Lou is back. You can follow him on Twitter at Gamblou, the host of the About Business podcast, and also does a great job weekly on VSiN.com. And Lou, I see you rocking an Arizona Wildcat shirt here. Is this for the movie Speed or for some other reason, sir?
There is the greatest show on dirt approaching, and that's the College World Series. It takes place at the end of June, the 16th, I think, this year. And it's a 10-day tournament, but the regionals begin this weekend, Dave. And so it's just like the final 64 in basketball, bracketed as such, and they begin this week. Arizona made it. I don't look for the Pac to do, very well, unfortunately, in a sport where you look at the SEC in football. Well, they're more dominant in baseball than they are in football.
Fascinating. I knew there had to be a reason for that Arizona shirt. Pretty sporting, I should say. All right, let's get to this card, Lou. And I know you got some releases that you're going to make in the About Business podcast. And again, when we all have a week off, it gives you a lot of time, I'm sure, to really dig into this one. And you looked at Karine Silva and Ketlin Souza here, and I wonder what your lean is here, because we see now that Silva, a rather large favorite here as we stand on a Tuesday.
That's correct, Dave. And again, before we get too far, I just want to thank you for having me on. Britton and you do a great job, and as well as all the other production people, on making us look good and come off at least well when we can pick a winner here and there. As far as this fight is concerned, it's situational. When it opened, it was 145. And really, Ketlin Souza is a debuting fighter who's stepping up, and she's going to be fighting a gal who we released, and now I'm going to go blank on her name, of course.
On Karine Silva.
Karine. Karine is a tiger, and she has UFC experience, and I really think that's the situation here. Anywhere to to 1. I think Karine is a fair buy. And the fact that we got her early, it was situational. It'd be a harder play for me to recommend her at current pricing. Where I would go, however, is on an inside the distance or via submission, because I believe that's her path to victory in a fight against a debuting fighter that's just stepping way up in class.
And there it is, Lou, to your point. You can get her via sub if you like Karine Silva here and don't want to pay the inflated price tag, rather. You can play her via sub at plus $1.65. So, again, this is what we always talk about at First Strike and what I think our experts do a great job, like Lou, of doing. You got a really good price on Silva, and now that it's ballooned almost $1 north of where you got it at, you're going to look at other ways with a good number already in pocket. So I think it's excellent advice out there. You don't necessarily want to chase bad numbers. If you feel like at 225 it's too pricey, look to the sub here at plus money, plus $1.65. Let's get to Philippe Lins against Maxime Grishin here. And when I see Grishin on this line, he's minus $1.35 with Lins at plus $1.15. What do you make of these veterans here?
Again, situational. It's early in the week. And to me, these are two ships going in different directions, really. Grishin hasn't been active at all in the last 2.5 years. In fact, his last fight was a year ago against William Knight, another light heavy, and they both were fighting at heavy. Grishin has made heavyweight fights before. He's tough, he's durable, he's a Russian master of sport and fighting, so he's got it all, but he's 39 and he's slower than evolution. On the other side of the cage is Philippe Lins, and I like where he's coming from. A heavyweight fighter that was pasty, slow, and unconditioned now goes down to light heavyweight, where I think he has much more speed, flash, and ferocity. His body has changed. I love the focus and what he's shown to me. His last fight against OSP was an early finish, but I made a mental note. Philippe Lins in this fight, and he opened minus 115. Now we're catching him plus 115 or so. I would be remiss to not take him now or monitor it closely and see if it changes. Take him then, but I think he's in a very good spot. He's been the more active fighter. He's the faster fighter, and I think for sure he's been the more active fighter. I think he's going to be the faster, more furious fighter.
Lynn's the young man at 37, with Grishin now at 39. You know that movie, No Country for Old Men. There is a country, UFC. You can just go to the UFC because this feels like an old man's paradise, this type of card. And let's get to the oldest guy on this card. And, of course, that would be Andrei Arlovski, the former UFC heavyweight champion. Again, debuted in the late 90s, and here we are in 2023, and he's still viable, right? And so you look at the number against Dontel Mays, and you can get small plus money here with a Pitbull plus $1.05. He's not the same, obviously. Nobody is ever the same when you've been fighting for 20-plus years, into your third decade of fighting. So he's not the knockout guy anymore. If you like Arlovski, would you look at him via decision, or do you think he's got another knockout? They always say power is the last thing to go.
Boy, I haven't been impressed with Dontrell Mays. His last fight, he had every chance in front of him. They couldn't get it done against a journeyman at best opponent. And so now you get Arlovski, who really is susceptible to fast, explosive guys. I don't think Mays has much of that. And for that reason, I do believe you're on the right track, indicating Arlovski decision. That's where I think the thing goes. If you look at the total, which to this point in time weren't out at DraftKings, but I have to think is that a 2.5 over under on that?
Yes, 2.5. Yes, you got to pay it minus $1.70. So again, I might not want to be in the business of laying that big price tag for the fight to go the distance, which is also minus $1.45. But yeah, it seems like if it goes to the cards, that's where Arlovski might have the best advantage there. You can get that via decision plus $1.50.
That's surely where I would go if I was looking at this fight. He's cagey in his metamorphosis. He's used intelligence, a jab, and his feet, believe it or not, at 41, 42 years old.
Yeah, that's right. He's still moving around that octagon here. So we'll see if Arlovski can turn back the hands of time once again. Another fighter on this card that I think, veterans, I think he's a Hall of Famer to be, would be Jim Miller, back inside the octagon here against Jared Flash Gordon. And we all look at Gordon and go, well, he beat Patty, he just got, bad decision, that sort of thing. So I think we can understand why he's a favorite. But again, Lou, you know this about some of these cagey veterans like a Jim Miller at almost 40. Do you really want to go against him and lay almost 2-1 against a future Hall of Famer?
Yeah, this is really a great one. And it's funny because between Gordon and Jim Miller and Orlovsky, we're catching the upper end as far as age in the card is concerned, but they're salty, they're experienced, and they're still around for a reason. In the case of Gordon, I think some people have had a little indigestion that he's coming around quick after being knocked out. I'm not so certain that would affect me. That kid has been through a lot. He's centered, and I love his approach to life, let alone how he fights. And I think he's going to be a formidable opponent for Jim Miller, who I just think is maybe on the other side. This is a good spot, I think, for Gordon. But at minus 190, maybe we look via decision or another way to try and attack it. I have an aversion to any kind of number with a minus in front of it.
It's a very smart and prudent way to go about what you do, Lou, and one of the best in the biz of doing just that. Let's get to the main event here in the time we have allotted with Kai Kara-France against Amir Albazi. And again, these are now the young guys, right? 30 and 29 on this card. But, Kai Kara-France feels like a guy that's been right there on the cusp, and maybe Albazi is starting to make that ascension towards a title run. Basically, a pick'em, Lou. What do you see in this 5-round potential main event?
Dave, I see flyweights as Moreno and Pantoja, and then a whole group of mashed potatoes down below it. And these two guys are fighting for the top of the heap of the mashed potatoes. And I say that because all those 25ers are the same. What differentiates them, in my opinion, is the ability to submit. Most flyweight fights, quite honestly, go to decision. But you throw submission in there, that's how they end, not power and with hands. And so Pantoja and Moreno both can play the submission game, and so can Albazi. Now, the key with Albazi is he's stepping way up in class against a city kickboxing guy that's got 5-round experience, coming off a loss to champion Moreno. So pedigree, experience, all go with Kai Kara-France. And biting off maybe more than he can chew is Albazi. Albazi opens 185. Now it's been, slammed down to an even kind of a fight. And so the way I look at it is I lean to Albazi here a little bit at the price, but don't want to commit just yet, Dave.
You're right. It looks like finishing potential on the ground for Albazi. Kai Kara-France like to keep the standing, but just avoid the liver kicks like he could not do the last time out against Brandon Moreno. Lou, always great to have you on, my friend. Again, follow him on Twitter at Gamblue and check out the Bout Business podcast. When we come back, we're going to Boston with Dan Vreeland next here on First Strike. Take your sports betting game to the next level this summer with a VSiN Pro subscription. Sign up now for just $9.99. Get access to everything we do, which includes daily pro picks on all the summer action, including NFL and college football futures, premium analysis from our top team of handicappers and industry experts, 24/7 video access, and pro tools like our exclusive betting splits, showing you where the public and sharp money is going to give you an edge for every single game. Start betting smarter. Visit VSiN.com/subscribe and sign up now. We are shipping up to Boston with Gumby Vreeland. That's how you follow Dan Vreeland on Twitter. Of course, he's the host of Top Turtle MMA Podcast, Sports Gambling Podcast Network, and much more. Dan, great to have you back on again when we have a week and a half off. Look at you. You shaved the beard. You look like a different person when we come back. You know how we have to start off this conversation. 2 questions wrapped up in one, even though I always told my interns never to ask 2 questions in one. Your favorite fight to watch and your favorite fight to bet on. What do you have, my friend?
So my favorite fight to watch has got to be Jim Miller versus Jared Gordon. I love both the guys. I've really loved the resurgence of Jim Miller. Suddenly he can box a little bit now, so I'm wondering what that looks like against Jared Gordon. I think that fight's got a lot of intrigue and maybe some interesting dog money there too, because I love Jim Miller and I love what he's been able to do as of late. My favorite fight to bet on right now, I love Felipe Lins versus Maxim Grishin because I like the dog money in that fight. I think people are overrating Grishin a little bit. He's not much of a wrestler, and since Felipe Lins has come down to light heavyweight. The dude's been kind of dangerous. He pieced up OSP pretty easily. He's fighting really long. And one of the things about Maxim Grishin is if Maxim Grishin can establish that range and doesn't wind up being the longer fighter like he was against William Knight, that's a lot of trouble. So I think Felipe Lins being the longer, bigger fighter and probably stronger fighter here and maybe even better wrestler is wildly underrated at plus 115.
And again, are you going to get cute with this one, or because you're getting the plus money already at plus $1.15 with Lins, maybe not even look for a method of victory? Just give me the plus money and we'll see how the 3-round potentially fight plays out.
Yeah, I think I'm sticking with just the straight money line here. There is definitely a knockout chance, but I'll say this. Maxim Grishin took a couple of heavy punches from Thick Willie, my boy William Knight. And if you can take a couple of big punches from him, hey, maybe he's got a good chin. I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, I just like the straight dog money here on Felipe Lins.
And again, I'm with you watching Jim Miller. Again, whenever I see a potential Hall of Famer to be, you're going to watch, right? Because you're seeing one of the best to do it now at 39 years young. You're getting solid money. And you mentioned maybe the prospect of an upset here with getting that money. Are you going to look at, because you think about Miller, fight gets down to the ground, he's always looking for subs. What way do you think Jim Miller gets this done? Do you think he has the potential to get to the cards, and could he win a decision?
You know, I actually like the Jim Miller inside the distance prop right now. You're seeing it there. It's plus 200. You're not getting huge value on that versus him to win. But look, Jared Gordon is the type of guy who is going to shoot a couple of takedowns in there. Wouldn't surprise me that he gets caught in a guillotine. And the other thing is he was knocked out recently. That fight did not go down as a loss, but he got knocked out. Those things are usually cumulative. I mentioned before, Jim Miller is a guy who's hitting harder and harder and harder as of late. So I wouldn't be surprised if he got the knockout either. But even if you're just in on the money line here, I think the money line on Jim Miller is super intriguing. But I do like the finish prop as well.
And Dan, I always like to get deep in the cards with you here to take a look at some fights that maybe other people are going to overlook. Because we understand when you have all these names on a card like this, the Andre Arlovskis and certainly the main event, we'll get to those. But when you look at a fight like, say, Elise Reed against Jinyu Frey, and I see Frey right now plus $1.10, Elise Reed minus $1.30, you're going to be digging in the weeds here for some fights people might be overlooking. What are you seeing in this one?
Yeah, this is another one where I kind of like the dog money here. I don't like it quite as much as I like Felipe Lins, but I will say for some of the same reasons I like Jinyu Frey here, because Frey is a fighter who came up as a Muay Thai fighter. She is a little bit undersized. But since then, she's really learned how to use her wrestling. She's working with Fortis MMA, Safe Saud, always one of my favorite coaches to tail on a bet here. So I like the idea that she's working with him and might use the wrestling. Because the thing about Elise Reed is that she can't get her boxing going. She gets pushed up against the cage too much. She gets put on her back. She really has a tough time. And she might be the bigger fighter here, which is, I think, the only reason we're seeing, her come in as the favorite. I still think Jinyu Frey can get her down. So I like the dog money here on Frey. This one's definitely going the distance too. You might as well just throw in the over or the decision prop as well.
All right, let me get to the biggest number on the card, and that would be Jamie Mularkey here, laying $5, Muhammad Navov getting plus $4 here. And understand when you get change of opponents and all those sort of things, you see this from time to time. But do you want to be in the business of laying $5 with Jamie Mularkey?
I think against Naimov on short notice here, I think he has a really easy time. Okay. Mostly just because, like, if you've looked at Naimov and you've looked at some of the fights he's lost in the past, he's gotten badly out wrestled. He's had a lot of trouble with people who can grapple with him. And Jamie Mularkey knows that when his striking isn't working, he's got that ace in the hole. He's used it time and time again. And when he hasn't been able to use it, he's lost fights, right? Like, that's actually probably when we've seen Jamie Mularkey at his worst, is when striking's not going and the backup wrestling's not working. I think he's going to have such an easy time wrestling here. I think he's probably going to wear Naimov out. It's another thing you see with these short notice guys. Their cardio often isn't good for 3 rounds. And if you're wrestling a guy who's going to be bigger than you and you had a rough weight cut, I mean, I think he's just going to be spent by the 3rd round.
All right, so maybe inside the distance here if you want to lower that price tag here on Jamie Mularkey. Let's get to Daniel Santos against Johnny Munoz. And right now you see Munoz here plus $1.75. You got to lay almost $2 here, $2.05 here to be exact with Santos. What do you make of this one?
I like Daniel Santos in this spot. I've talked to Johnny Munoz a bunch of times. I'm a real big fan of his style. I like the takedowns he shoots. But the thing about Santos is he's one of those guys who just kind of never settles for position. He's always moving. He's always, if you get him down, he will not be down long.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about that against somebody like, Johnny Munoz is that's going to force Johnny Munoz to either work extra hard or box. And I really like the cardio of Daniel Santos. He's definitely going to be a better striker than Johnny Munoz. And I've also heard Johnny Munoz say as of late, he's been working on his Muay Thai. He really likes his new Muay Thai coach, been spending more and more time with him. I'm a little bit worried this is going to be one of those situations where a grappler is really falling in love with his hands or his kicks. And he's going to be up against the guy who I think is faster than him and quite a bit better of a striker than him.
All right, we got Abu Bakar Nurmagomedov back in there against Dos Santos, and right now you're seeing that basically as a pick'em here in the welterweight division. What do you make of that? And I wonder if those numbers are going to stay right where they are here, basically about minus $1.10 either way.
I think you're actually going to see money come in on Nurmagomedov. He's got the Nurmagomedov bump.
Yep.
No matter what, have that last name or a similar sounding Russian name, the money's going to come in late on him. And I think it's a mistake because let me tell you something. I love Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. I'm a little bit worried about the layoff. We haven't seen him since he beat the ever-living hell out of Benoit Saint Denis. But he's a great striker. He's super creative. He moves a lot. I think the pressure is going to bother Abubakar Nurmagomedov. I think he's going to get in his face. And the other thing is, and you're never going to hear this, Nurmagomedov does not have the wrestling advantage here. Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos actually has really good jiu-jitsu, really good body lock takedowns. He does a good job of getting underneath the hips as long as he can get you against the cage. And I think with that pressure, I think we're going to see Abubakar with his back up against the cage for most of this fight.
You do not say that very often about Nurmagomedov with that last name. Did not have the wrestling advantage. That would be a surprise for sure. Okay, so I'll look for the money to come in here, maybe the wrong way. I want to talk about Tim Elliott here because, again, you go back to the Mackenzie Dern fight here a couple weeks ago with all this, all the things going on outside of the octagon we thought might affect her inside. It did not. She said it fueled her. We know Tim Elliott's kind of in the same situation, very public, out there of what's going on in his personal life. Yet he's minus $1.75 here against Victor Altamirano. What do you make of this? Because I wonder if that is going to play in, or do you think, again, it fuels Elliott to the positive?
I'm hoping it fuels him to the positive. This is a tough one because it's so public.
Yeah.
And it involves a whole bunch of names we know. Because, not that we don't know Mackenzie Dern's husband, he's a famous surfer or whatever, but, this is all MMA sphere. So
yes.
it feels more real. And the weird thing about this one is, I'm hoping it fuels him because on paper, this matchup reads like it's a dream matchup for Tim Elliott. If you just told me Tim Elliott was negative 175 against Victor Altamirano and all this noise isn't happening, I'm all over Tim Elliott. I think that's an amazing spot. I'm a little more hesitant based on the fact that all this other stuff is going on. But the bottom line is Victor Altamirano, fun striker, but a little bit spazzy, doesn't like being in a clinch, kind of freaks out when he's in bad situations. And Tim Elliott's the worst kind of person to fight if you don't like scrambling and you're having a tough time in the scrambles and you're freaking out in the clinch. Tim Elliott gets after it. So I'm really just hoping we see the actual version of Tim Elliott. As long as we do, you're going to look really good at negative 175.
All right, a little spazzy. I'm going to steal that. It's really good. Okay, I only have about 30 seconds to go here, Dan. I got to get your thoughts very quickly. Kai Kara France, Amir Albazi. Is this as simple as if it stays standing, it's Kai Kara? If it goes to the ground, then Amir's got a good shot?
That's it. I think it's that. And here's the 2-second breakdown of it. I think it stays standing. I think Kai Kara France is better at defending the takedown than people give him credit for. And I'll also say this. Amir Albazi has looked great grappling, but when you look at that list of opponents that he's looked really good grappling, Alessandro Costa, not Davison Figueiredo, the other one, Francisco, it ain't a great list. So give me the Kai Kara France here.
All right, right now minus $1.10, so basically a pick 'em either way. Dan, great to have you back on, my friend. We'll catch up again next week right here on First Strike. When we come back, we're going to Washington, D.C. to catch up with Reed Kuhn. Come on back, First Strike here on VSiN. Rolling on this edition of First Strike. Dave Ross here at Circus Sportsbook. Always great to go back to the nation's capital to catch up with our guy, Reed Kuhn. You can follow Reed at Fightnomics. He is the author of the book, Fightnomics. Also on ESPN. He's basically everywhere, as well he should. Great to have you back on, Reed. And I know after we have a week off, it feels like a month off here. So you really have time to dig into the numbers. And if for you, as an analytics guy and a data-driven guy, boy, is this fight card for you. I mean, we've got guys that have been in there for a really long time. I do want to start off in the co-main event here when you look at a guy like Bruce Leroy and Alex Caceres. And we've seen him mature inside the octagon, and now at 34, he's still 3 years younger than Daniel Pineda. So you've got a lot of data on these guys. Is Caceres, do the numbers support being a $1.75 favorite at this juncture?
Yeah, don't look now. Caceres has quietly put in a very strong winning record in the last few years, and he has a pretty good streak. I mean, he has one loss in there. But statistically, he has always showed up pretty well on paper. He's a very accurate striker. He's well-rounded. And for a time, I feel like it was just a maturity thing. Like when things were clicking, he looked amazing. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they wouldn't be clicking and he would go out on his shield. But against Daniel Pineda, if you just line these guys up, Caceres has the advantages all over the sheet. And Pineda is one of the worst defensive strikers on the card, combined with Caceres being pinpoint accurate. And plenty of sample size here for Caceres, over 300 minutes of octagon time, and he's still firing off at 42% head strike accuracy. That is really good. You normally don't see that except among the elite strikers. And that pairing tells me that as long as this is on the feet, it's going to be Caceres winning those combinations.
And here's the thing, too, Reed, and obviously Caceres can be very, very explosive, right? And a very odd fighter to be in the octagon with against a guy like Pineda. And when I see in a potential 3-round here co-main event, and the total sitting at a round and a half, it's telling me that we're expecting serious finishing potential. Are you seeing that? Is the data proving that out to be correct?
Yeah, on the feet, Caceres is a pretty sneaky striker, and he's on the small side or in smaller divisions. You don't normally see a lot of knockouts, and his knockdown rate isn't abnormally high. But again, when you're dealing with a target that is going to make itself available that often and that easily, he's going to have his strikes. He's going to have his moments. Now, the 1.5 rounds on a featherweight fight, that makes me a little bit nervous.
Right.
But I do see finishing potential in this fight overall. And Caceres can finish it, whether it's set up by strikes or actual strikes that finishes it. Pineda is going to be the one trying to get this to the ground. And at least Caceres has the experience and maturity at this point in his career to deal with that.
So again, if you think the fight can go all three, really solid plus money at plus $1.95 without picking a winner. But certainly the numbers there, I'm with you. A little bit leery for 1.5 if you want to play the under at plus money. Maybe a finish could come before you get to the third round here, but it does feel like you can see why right now juiced at minus $2 to get over 7.5 minutes. You got Dontel Mays on this card, but really it's not Mays that we're looking at for the data. It is Andrei Arlovski at 44 years young here, still going strong. It does feel like he's not the KO guy anymore. It does feel like now a decision-type fighter. Reed, what are the numbers showing you here?
It seems like they gave Arlovski a decent matchup stylistically and in terms of the numbers, because Mays isn't really a wrestler. He's willing to duke it out with you, but he doesn't really show up as exceptional in any way. When you look at them side by side, Arlovski pairs pretty well, with the glaring exception of size and youth. If the traditional tale of the tape, if that's as far as you went, you would be like, whoa, this is Mays all day. And certainly those numbers are feeding into the analytics that say he's a deserving favorite, because you don't normally see someone with a 13-year age differential being on the underdog side. So in that respect, yes, I respect the fact that Mays, in theory, should have a good chance here. But we know that Arlovski is one of those guys. He can just lull you into a point striking match, which is so odd for the heavyweight division. And this might be the perfect opponent to allow that to happen. Is that he's not going to take you down. He's going to sit there and box with you. And maybe his striking isn't quite as crisp as Arlovski. So I think early on, I thought Mays was opening up either as a break even or even a dog pick. And that's when I loved it. Now he's a favorite, I think. And maybe I might back off a little bit, because stylistically it plays into Arlovski's bet. But you won't find me betting on a 44-year-old guy with a 13-year-old or 13-year age differential. You probably won't see me do that. So if anything, I'm going to go with Mays here.
And when you look at the sub prices, right, 18-1 for Arlovski, plus 750 for Mays, it feels like if it doesn't go the distance, which right now you got to lay $1.45, It's KO for Arlovsky at 8-1, which is a big long shot, and Mays at 3-1 here because we know that Andre's chin is not the same chin. Even though you're 44, you can take a punch. I don't know how many more you can take. Would you look into those markets, or do you think this is going to be a points fight here either way?
Don't get too lulled into looking at the historical pattern of Arlovsky, because the fact remains, yes, you're right. He is 44. He's facing a striker. They have 11 combined knockdowns received between them. That is more than the 10 that Arlovsky has scored offensively. So Arlovsky is both the greater threat in terms of the precision and power of his hands, but he is also far more vulnerable. And Dante Mays is, he is vulnerable. He's been dropped twice. His defense isn't as good as Arlovsky in terms of avoiding those strikes. So I do see knockout potential. These are still heavyweights. They are not young men anymore. And if they spend 15 minutes slugging it out, someone might go down. I think some of those prices are going to just be changed over time because Arlovsky has gone to the card so many times. But step back and put it in context. This is still a heavyweight striker fight.
Okay, so maybe some value there on those KO, TKO, or DQ prices. Let's get to Flash Gordon here. Obviously coming in as the favorite against Jim Miller. But again, when we talk about veterans, and Arlovsky's probably going to the Hall of Fame, and I assume Jim Miller, that's where he's going to end up as well when his career is over. He's 39. Gordon, not exactly a spring chicken at 34. Is Gordon the rightful $1.90 fave at this stage?
I think it is. Now, again, I think I have seen some price movement on this one. I am leading Gordon, and age is less of a problem in this one. I mean, 5-year differential is sort of the minimum of where I start taking notice, and that's where they are. Miller has been fairly durable. I think he did have some health problems earlier on in his career that he's gotten over. But yeah, like between Jim Miller and Andrei Arlovsky, we have two of the most longest tenured fighters in UFC history, both on the same card. It's kind of weird in that respect. But I do like Gordon here. I think he does pair well. He's not a terribly effective striker on the feet in terms of power, but he has been accurate. And that is effective. He's just going to, point you up on the feet, but then really, hopefully he's going to set up that takedown, and he's much more likely to try to take this down to the ground. Miller has been a willing guy to go to the floor because he has those submissions. He's got the guillotines. He's got lots of ways to wrap you up. But those experienced wrestlers, when you think about what trumps what, Gordon's wrestling could, defeat the submission style of Miller, whereas Miller usually enjoyed that advantage over people that didn't know how to stay out of trouble on the ground. And Gordon is that guy. And so I think that is why I'm leaning his way.
Well, that's fascinating to me because, again, you would think maybe if Miller, as you mentioned, he does not mind going down there to look for subs. Jim is 5-1 right now to get a submission victory. If the fight goes the distance, it's minus $1.15. You see that it's priced at 2.5 rounds over to hit the over there is $1.45. Do you think we're looking at a sub versus a KO, TKO, or DQ that if the fight goes down to the ground, both guys have that finishing potential? Gordon, a long shot at 12-1 to get a sub victory.
I think Gordon has to be careful. He doesn't want to overextend himself and then get caught in something. And so that screams to me control time. He's going to want to take you down and keep you there. Jim Miller does have a submission attempt on half of his trips to ground. And so he's going to be active in the guard, but Gordon's got to be prepared for that. And you're right. He's fairly experienced at this point in his career. 145 minutes octagon time. That's plenty to know not to do the one thing your opponent wants you to do, which is overextend your head somewhere it shouldn't be. So I think he plays it conservative. I would be probably, if I'm looking for a scenario, I'm probably going Gordon in the over because I don't want him to get too aggressive.
I do want to ask you here, got about a minute and a half to go here on the main event. When you look at Kai France, and again, this is a guy that's fought everybody there is to fight, obviously, in this division at 125 pounds, against a guy in Albazi who feels like he could be next in line here in the division, but it is a huge jump up in competition for him. Do you have enough data on Amir to formulate something yet? Or are you going to wait and see as we get closer and closer? Because right now it looks like a pick'em fight.
I want to see where the prices go. I also want to see, once it comes to fight night, I want to see how well Albazi does taking this big leap up. Like you said, this is a huge jump up. Kai France is among that elite in the division. He has, championship level type fights. Amir has just 3 or 4 fights in the UFC to begin with. Not a lot of octagon time. Statistically, he has done well. When I line them up, the advantages are on his side, the challenger's side here, Albazi. And so I see him, this is his big chance to prove himself. A win against this guy, against Kai Kara-France, pretty much catapults him into the title picture one way or the other, whether it takes one more fight or goes directly in. Statistically speaking, and if you take an analytical view, you got to believe that you trust the numbers. We have a wrestler versus striker, and you got to go with the wrestler in that case. Don't like that it's 5 rounds, and I haven't seen this guy go into the later rounds, but that's where I'm leaning.
Thank you, Reed. Thanks for watching First Strike. Enjoy the fights, everybody. See you next week.